Well, I think I'll probably just get going here, and expecting maybe a couple more people to log on here as I get started. But I want to thank those of you who have joined us this evening to the third webinar in this series offered by Grassroots North Shore, and want to thank Grassroots North Shore for inviting me to give this presentation that I'm calling The Collision Between the War on Poverty and Recent Tax Policy Choices. My name's John Peacock. I'm the director of the Wisconsin Budget Project, which is an initiative of the Wisconsin Council on Children and Families. It started back about 15 years ago in 1999 when I first came to the council, initiated the Budget Project as a source of timely, credible analysis of how state spending decisions and tax decisions affect low and middle-income families in Wisconsin. If you're not already familiar with the Budget Project, I really hope you'll check out our website, look at our blog posts, and maybe sign up to receive our blogs, look at our Facebook page, etc. And I'll be providing the links to those as we go through this. Just before we get into the substance of the presentation this evening, a few housekeeping things. All of you or most of you anyway, are on mute, so that avoids feedback during the presentation. While you can't ask questions orally, you can use the chat tool over in the lower left corner of your screen to type in your questions. After about 15 minutes, I'll come around to do those. After you type in your questions, hit the return key to send those. And am I still too loud, or is the sound quality okay?
It's good. Sound quality is good.
Okay. One thing, if you want to increase the size of the PowerPoint presentation, if you put your cursor up on the upper right-hand corner, there's an icon up there that can maximize the size of the PowerPoint on your screen. So tonight, what I'm going to cover with respect to the war on poverty, and in a 15-minute presentation, this has to be pretty cursory, but just hitting on some highlights. As most of you probably know, we had the 50th anniversary just a couple weeks ago of President Johnson's speech where he launched the war on poverty. And that 50th anniversary has set off a lot of discussion about the successes and some would argue failures of the war on poverty, and I think we'll be hearing a whole lot more of that over the coming year. A lot of conservative politicians and conservative pundits are using this year to try to drive a stake in the heart of anti-poverty programs, contending that the war on poverty has been a failure. I'm going to explain very briefly why I think the facts show quite the opposite, although clearly we have a long way to go yet. And I'm going to talk about how some of the successes of the war on poverty have been running up against a tide flowing in the opposite direction, a tide of economic trends and policy decisions, including federal and state tax policy, that is making it much harder to achieve the goals of the war on poverty by exacerbating inequality, making it harder for people to climb into the middle class. And I'll touch very briefly on what all of us can do about that. So when you think about the effectiveness of the war on poverty, one thing is that it depends somewhat on whether you're looking or which demographic group you're looking at. This slide shows in the light blue the poverty rates as a percentage of the population for seniors and for children. And the war on poverty over the last 50 years or so has been extremely successful in terms of reducing the poverty rate for seniors. For kids, on the other hand, there were initial successes, but then over the years, much less so as economic trends tend to cut in the other direction. But as you think about the success of the war on poverty, one thing to really keep in mind is that the poverty measure, the traditional poverty measure, is a deeply flawed way of looking at poverty. And there are a couple of problems with it. One, from the outset, it has really undercounted the cost of living. And but the second thing, and that makes it particularly difficult to use it to measure the success of anti-poverty programs, is that a lot of those benefits don't show up in the measure of poverty or the measure of income used in calculating whether someone's in poverty. Things like the earned income tax credit and food stamps and a number of other benefits don't count as income. And so when we provide those benefits, we don't see the success of that in the official poverty measure. So for that reason, in recent years, there's been a supplemental measure that's been developed that that does a better job of reflecting the true cost of living, and that's why it starts out higher. It's the blue line in this chart. So it starts out much higher, but it also, because it takes into account different public benefits, it shows how those benefits actually have succeeded in reducing the poverty rate over the last 50 years. And this slide from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities shows how specific programs have had the effect of reducing poverty rates for people of all ages, and then specifically in the lighter blue for kids. And you can see there how about 2.2 million kids have been lifted out of poverty by food stamps, 4.9 million people of all ages lifted out of poverty by food stamps, and far more for the earned income from the earned income tax credit and child tax credits. So, in short, the anti-poverty programs have been quite successful in a lot of ways, but their success has been mitigated by economic trends. If you look back over the last 60 years or so at how people's incomes have changed, what this chart shows is that people near the top, the 95th percentile, so if you think of the top 5%, the red line is somebody just at the bottom of that top group. This chart shows how from essentially World War II until the late 1970s, or maybe about the beginning of the Reagan administration, how you could truly say that a rising tide lifted all boats, that everybody at different income levels was seeing the benefits of the improving economy nationally. But then that changed really substantially right around 1980. And while people at the top continue to see their incomes rise significantly, that has not been true for median income households and people in the bottom 20%. So that's what we're up against, and that has a lot to do with some worldwide economic trends which are far too complicated to get into this evening if I really fully understood them. And but it also has to do with various public policy choices, including tax policy choices, and I'll come to that in a minute. But in this chart, we took some data that we got a year or two ago from the State Department of Revenue to show specifically for Wisconsin how over the last 14 years, the bottom two-fifths of Wisconsinite have actually lost ground when you look at their income adjusted for inflation, compared to a 43% gain for the top 1% of income earners in Wisconsin. So, as I said, while there's some economic trends that come into play here, there are also any number of different policy choices at both the federal level and the state level, including tax policy choices. And I want to talk about a few of those in Wisconsin in recent years. In the governor's first budget, for example, he cut taxes for the wealthy in a number of different ways, including cutting the income taxes for capital gains, which predominantly benefits wealthier people. And then at the same time, he cut specific tax credit programs for low-income households, including the state earned income tax credit. And he changed the homestead tax credit that helps low-income homeowners and renters afford their property taxes, because he removed the provision that allows that credit to go up with inflation, whereas almost all the rest of the tax code is adjusted for inflation. That no longer is, and that's a problem for low-income households in our state. Then in the last budget, he pushed through income tax cuts that predominantly help the very wealthy. This first chart shows that whereas those tax cuts help 99% of people making at least $100,000, they only help about 2/5 of tax filers who make under $30,000. And when you analyze those income tax cuts a little differently, this chart shows how for somebody making under $50,000, their average benefit is $45 a year compared to over $1,400 for somebody with an income of $300,000 or higher. So the tax cuts in the budget were really skewed. The governor back shortly before the holidays floated a trial balloon for a different kind of tax cut, actually for eliminating the income tax. I wouldn't call it a proposal at this point, but just a trial balloon that we tried our best to pop as quickly as possible by pointing out what that would do by eliminating the income tax and replacing it with an increase in the sales tax, which would require increasing the sales tax from the current 5% state rate to about 5% to about 13.5%. And this shows how for someone making a little under $30,000, that would cost them net a little over $1,000 a year, whereas someone making a little over $1 million would benefit to the tune of almost $44,000 a year. Now, hopefully, that proposal won't resurface. It was not part of the governor's State of the State message last night. So in short, just sort of getting to what I think are the key takeaways here, and I'm sorry to sort of do a pretty cursory overview of all this, but anti-poverty programs have truly been successful, yet increasingly they're underfunded, and they're swimming upstream against an economic tide that's making it harder for people to climb out of poverty and into the middle class, and harder for the middle class to climb up the income ladder. And so it's an economic tide of rapidly increasing inequality. The forces behind that are varied, but part of it is an array of policy choices like not indexing the minimum wage and state-level policy decisions that lead to increased inequality. And so all of us can make a difference in this by making sure that we're in touch with our legislators and speaking up on the topic, writing letters to the editor, using social media to share information with others about it, and just in general making sure that we try to let policymakers know that this is that anti-poverty programs can be effective if we're truly committed to them, and that it's important for all of us economically that we get back to the day when everyone in society benefited from economic gains, and that those gains weren't all concentrated at the top, because in the long run, that is going to be an extremely unhealthy economic situation. So on this slide, and all of this presentation is on the North Shore website, and we'll post it on the Budget Project website as well, so you can access all of this there. But this shows the links to the WCCF website, to the Budget Project website, our blog, etc. And as I said earlier, I urge you to check out our blog if you're interested in following along on the types of issues relating to state tax policy and what the governor's proposing in that regard in terms of using the state surplus. As I said earlier, this is the third of the series of webinars. Stay tuned for the one next Thursday, which is going to be what's at stake for women's health care in Wisconsin. And on the Grassroots North Shore website, you can find this and past webinars and future webinars. And this one will be posted there in the next couple of days. And so with that, I'm happy to take questions. I'm just looking here to see what we've got. Joe asked what I think are good arguments for a progressive tax rate. First, let me point out that Wisconsin does have a very progressive income tax, and I think that's important for a number of reasons. But one reason is that the other taxes fall pretty heavily on the poor, and particularly the sales tax. The sales tax is by far the most regressive tax, and the progressive income tax really balances that out. Property tax is a little bit more complicated. It's somewhat flat across people of different income levels, but can be a very problematic tax for some older people, and particularly as they get to a point in life where it's hard for them to afford the home that they've been to stay in the home that they've been living in for a long time. But in general, I think in terms of the importance of a progressive tax is just so people a lot of low-income people, for one thing, aren't making nearly enough to live on and to have a decent quality of life, and so it's important that we don't penalize them with the tax code, and that we allow them to participate economically in a more robust way, that if we continue to drive apart people to drive inequality, we aren't going to have the people who can purchase the goods and services that make our economy thrive. Let's see, and I think Eileen asked, do I know how many minimum wage earners live in poverty? How would an increase in the minimum wage change that? Good question. I didn't prepare for that one this evening. I can get back to you on that. It is, there's a general perception, and it's fueled by people on the right that nearly everybody who makes the minimum wage is like a teenager working in fast food, and that they aren't breadwinners. Actually, and while certainly there are plenty of teenagers or young people who don't have kids who are in minimum wage jobs, there are more and more adults who are the primary caretakers for their families who are also working in minimum wage jobs or jobs that are just barely above the minimum wage. So it's increasingly important, given the sort of changing demographic of people working at that level, that we finally increase the minimum wage in a significant way, and then adjust it annually for inflation. Joe asked about the tax on manufacturers being phased out, which is a good point. In the governor's first budget, he adopted a provision that all but eliminates the state income tax on manufacturers, which I think is a really short-sighted decision from a tax policy perspective, because you're putting money in the pockets of corporations and their stockholders, kind of on the theory that they're going to use that to create more jobs, but there's absolutely no requirement that they do so. That they can benefit by that tax reduction, whether they're growing, whether they're shrinking, and all of that money can be going to stockholders elsewhere. And there are far more effective ways to target tax cuts to really promote job creation. And another question from Joe: is there an area you know about, or is this an area you know about? And if so, what's happening? So I think, again, that's with respect to the manufacturer's tax credit. There, I hope that's an issue that we can revisit down the road. I can't see that happening anytime this session and under this governor, but I think perhaps at a future date we'll start taking a look at that kind of thing. Certainly the early track record is that the growth in manufacturing jobs over the last 2 years, now granted this tax cut is still being phased in, but Wisconsin's growth in manufacturing jobs hasn't been particularly high relative to other states. In fact, it depends which period of time you look at, but I think it's actually lower than the national average. And the other thing that was misguided about that decision is that there were changes that were made in the structure of corporate income taxes about 5-6 years ago, or maybe a little longer than that, back under the Doyle administration, that changed the corporate income tax so that the portion of a multi-state corporation, when you look at what portion of their income is taxable in Wisconsin, that you would no longer penalize them for growing in Wisconsin the way the tax code arguably used to do. So they can come in and grow in our state with no ill effect on having a higher income taxable in Wisconsin. So that was a huge step towards making it possible for them to increase jobs here without worrying about tax repercussions, and it really mitigates any positive impact of this new effort to totally eliminate corporate taxes for manufacturers. So I just, in closing, and I'd be happy to field any other questions, but I do think that speaking out on this is really important. I think we've seen it making a difference. there was a considerable fuss at several points over the last few years as the governor made tax policy decisions that really were quite regressive. And actually, to my surprise, the tax policy choices that he outlined in his State of the State speech last night were a lot less regressive than what he'd proposed before now, and far less damaging than I thought they would be. Now the problem with them isn't so much whether they're sort of regressive or to what extent. The problem with them is just that they probably aren't just the right way to go in terms of using a surplus. We had to start by paying some of our bills, by paying down the big increase in bonding in recent years, by building up an adequate rainy day fund and an adequate cushion in the state general fund balance, so that if those projected surpluses prove to be overly optimistic, that we have something to fall back on. But the governor's plan doesn't do that. He doesn't reverse the tax increases imposed on low-income families. He doesn't do anything to address a hole in the state Medicaid budget, and he actually increases instead of decreases the structural deficit. So in many respects, what he proposed last night was really disappointing, but I think he has responded to some of the criticism about how regressive the income tax cuts were in the budget, and came up with a somewhat fairer way of cutting taxes this time around. But we're not using any of that revenue for a lot of other things, including K-12 and higher education, that I really think would be far more effective in growing the state economy. So I think we're pretty close to the half hour here, and again, I really appreciate your having me on, and I thank you for having the series, and I encourage everybody to tune in next Thursday for the one on what's at stake for women's health care in Wisconsin. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John. And we will.
Thank you, John. It was wonderful.
We will be putting the presentation and the recording of the presentation with links on our Grassroots North Shore website and the Wisconsin Budget Project website. So, till next week.